Re-Zero, Arc 8, Chapter 47, Tanza.
This was a complex feeling, but just like Natsuki Schwartz, Tanza hated the Wallachian Empire. The people of the empire must be strong. Such a way of thinking was given wondrous praise, and in accordance with it, those who lacked strength were oppressed, and even were they to lose their lives, it would be declared that their weakness was at fault. The weak were unqualified to be people of the empire. If that were the case, she would like to be excused. None could choose where they were born. Therefore, neither Tanza nor anybody else had been born into the Wallachian Empire of their own volition. Tanza hated the Wallachian Empire. She hated the empire that had taken her mother and father, the empire that, for some incomprehensible reason such as the imperial way, had tortured her sister to death, the sister who had assiduously raised Tanza, the sister who had been relieved upon finally finding a place where they could live in peace, the sister whom Tanza should have been able to finally repay for everything she had done for her. She was sure that had been why. Do you happen to hate this country? When posed that question, her expression, which seldom showed emotion, became stiff, and she held her breath. Something which must not be noticed, a thought which must not be known, an ideology which one would naturally have from being ostracized. She thought it had been found out. However, upon seeing Tanza cast down her eyes as she trembled, the beautiful woman who had seen through her heart smiled, and tenderly stroked Tanza's stiffened cheek. The warmth of those fingers felt similar to that of her sister, whom she had already lost. It felt similar to that of her sister, who had devoted herself to Tanza without consideration for herself, who had died without knowing any happiness that seemed to be her own. Woman, I do, too. For a moment, not understanding what exactly that meant, Tanza was perplexed. After that confusion, she comprehended what the woman's words were expressing feelings about, and she gulped. If a child like Tanza, unknowing of how things worked, were to say that, it would merely end with them being scolded and punished. However, this person was unlike them. She was not merely an adult, for she was a person with status. Within this empire, that believed in strength, she was one of the 9 people who were a symbol of strength. Woman, I, too, despise the ways of this country. Indeed, while giving a tender, affectionate smile, that person confided her true feelings in Tanza. Tanza, please, send me to Yona Summer. I wish to be by her side. In the battle on which the survival of the empire was staked, she was aware that what she was asking was selfish. That was why she had been prepared to endure all sorts of verbal abuse. Thinking that being spoken to in such a manner was unavoidable, that even if she were to be showered with cursing and scolding, she still needed to be honest with her feelings. And even though she had thought that, yeah, that's what I intend to do. Let her see your face well, and properly go talk to her. Despite always selfishly putting Tanza's feelings on the back burner, only at a time like this did he speak to Tanza's feelings directly, almost like he was giving her an order. That was an aspect she disliked about this black-haired boy. Tanza, Yona Summer. And right after she had called that out, Tanza stretched out her small body as much as she could, and receiving the flash of silver head-on, she saved the precious woman who was about to be decapitated. The shock ran through the entirety of her being, sending a tingling and numbing sensation to the tips of her limbs. But, in order to hide the fact that she felt pain, she bit down on her molars. Not for the opponent who had unleashed the sword attack, but in order to hide it from the precious woman she had protected. Tanza, firmly stifling her cries of pain and her expression, she endured. She usually found it frustrating, but at this time she was grateful for her cold face. It must have appeared like she had withstood it with a face as if to say that it was not a big deal, even though in truth, without the shield of ice concealed inside her kimono, she would have undoubtedly been split right in two. You all have the same face, but everyone get out of the way. Following Tanza's bluff, a courageous voice with a tone akin to silver bells could be heard. The reason why Tanza had not been cleaved in twain, the one who had hidden an ice shield for her, the silver-haired half-elf Emilia gallantly swooped down on the imperial capital, and pointed her hands at the rows of undead who bore the same face. Right after, a high-pitched sound like that of cracking glass enveloped the area. Clear ice had shot out of the ground, and trapping the undead one after another in glacial prisons. The undead immediately either tried to jump away and escape, or tried to evade by ducking low, or tried to cut off the freezing with their swords. But those who had selected the correct answer were few. Those who jumped, those who ducked, and those who drew their blades, were made part of the blooming ice flowers in the sky, on the ground, and with their drawn swords respectively, and were quite literally frozen in ice wherever they were, engulfing nearly 20 of the undead in their entirety. There were merely a few who had escaped. She wished to exhaust her vocabulary in praise of that, but right now, Tanza, at long last, I was able to meet you again. The severed shield of ice fell from her kimono, and diffused into mana before it could hit the ground. Then, with the chest from which the hard sensation had been removed, Tanza embraced the head of the woman who had fallen to her knees. Even though Tanza had been held like this by her before, since she was a tall woman, it was the first time Tanza was embracing her in such a manner. To be frank, she had thought it was embarrassing to have this kind of thing done to her. She had thought it would not set a good example, and it was frustrating being treated like a child. But she had never disliked it, and her thoughts on being treated like a child had also changed. Was it not the case that Schwartz and Cecilus could do as they pleased, regardless of being small or being children? Even if being a child became an obstacle when trying to do something, it was by no means a reason to give up. Tanza tried to return that to this person with her whole body, shedding blood, the woman whose blue eyes were widened in surprise while embracing Yorna. Tanza turned her dark eyes to the enemy, to the nuisance who was getting in the way, and then, Tanza, scoundrel who turns a blade to Yorna Summer, though I may be unworthy, I shall serve as your opponent. With that clear declaration, she asserted her own standpoint. Undead, accepting Tanza's proclamation, neither the undead men, nor Yorna, embraced in her chest, made a sound. Were they perhaps shocked by the foolish action, or was it Tanza's sudden arrival that was the reason for their shock? It mattered not either way, and Tanza readied herself while still holding Yorna. Thereupon, Emilia, Teria, undead, Yuo. Emilia's sprinting attack was even faster than Tanza's movements. Stepping forth with her long legs, Emilia swung the ice mallets that she had created in both of her hands down on the motionless undead. The undead man who had been focused on Tanza was taken aback as he swept those aside, and he squared off against Emilia. Emilia, I'm the opponent of all of you, undead, though, that lass over there just said she'd be my opponent. Emilia, right now, Tanza-chan has finally encountered Yorna-san, who she's been longing to meet. You guys? You all have the same face, but I won't let you guys get in the way. Undead, it might be difficult to understand, but even if there's more, I'm me. Rowan's segment, the individual. Ain't no need for you to get confused over that. Emilia, I won't let you get in the way. Emilia produced twin swords of ice in her hands as she corrected herself, and the callously smiling undead, all of the multiple Rowans, took the same stance as they faced off against Emilia. From behind, as Tanza tried to back her up with an Emilia Summer. Emilia, it's okay, you can talk to Yorna-san first. Subaru requested this of me. Tanza, as Schwartz's name came up, Tanza hesitated to speak. During that time, Emilia left behind a smile as her expression shifted to a stiff one, and taking a step towards the Rowans who were readied with their katanas in their sheaths. Emilia, icicle line. After Emilia's lips spun those words, the surrounding scene was dyed with even more white. Every color was mixed with a silvery white, and trying to counter the twin swords of the snow-clad Emilia, Rowan smiled in satisfaction. Thereupon, an icicle storm assailed. Rowan, oh, Emilia, here I come. Rowan, who seemed to have thought that a contest of swordsmanship was starting, while stupefied at the bombardment of ice, fought against Emilia's incoming attacks. The light ice weapons clashed with the undead's katana, and the sword dance commenced. In the background of that sword dance, Tanza depended upon Emilia's consideration, and looked to Yorna once again. Still, her expression appeared as if she had not caught up with the situation. Tanza, this is the first time I have witnessed Yorna Summer make such a face. Yorna, Tanza, is that you? Tanza slightly lowered the corners of her eyes in happiness, and while staring at that face, Yorna spoke words with meaning for the first time since their reunion. At that question, Tanza nodded. Since their parting at Chaos Flame, she had been separated from Yorna for nearly 2 months. Since there had been no correspondence, it would have been natural for Yorna to have assumed that Tanza was dead. Tanza, however, I have remained safe and sound. For the sake of returning to Yorna Summer, gazing back into Yorna's eyes, she reassuringly spoke those words. The words that had hit Yorna as her eyes quivered at this reality. For being something she had spoken herself, there was an unthinkable reassurance to it. Maybe this had been due to the influence of the people who could say things without any pretensions. It was proof that Tanza had been through all sorts of things in the 2 months she had been separated from Yorna, but Tanza was not the only one who had changed, as so had Yorna. Yorna was wearing a beautiful, blue dress. Without the kimono that Tanza was used to seeing, she was wearing her hair down, more so than giving excitement over the novelty. That appearance gave Tanza some misgivings. It was not that she was skeptical of a change in tastes. Yorna's ornaments, the articles presented to her by the inhabitants of Chaos Flame, the fact that she was not wearing them was suspicious. The inhabitants who dwelled in the demon city of Chaos Flame, they all loved and respected Yorna very much. In order to convey their heart of hearts, they would take parts of their unique features as demi-humans, something that served as the primary reason for them being ostracized, put them to good use, and designed them as ornaments to present to Yorna. Everything from hairpins to earrings, to a beadome to pins or threads for her kimono, Yorna clad herself in the affection of Chaos Flame's inhabitants, and had come to present herself in a majestic manner. Among those were combs carved out from a part of Tanza's, and of Tanza's sister's horns. Yorna, Tanza, her name called out by trembling lips. Tanza waited for Yorna's discomposure to subside. She also wanted to assist Emilia as she fought Rowan, but right now before her eyes, she wanted to put all her energy towards sorting out Yorna's emotions. Nervously, Yorna's fingers reached out towards Tanza's cheek. After ascertaining that feeling, Tanza would exchange words with her. However, Yorna's fingers did not come into contact with Tanza's cheek. Tanza, Yorna Summer, just as they were about to touch, Yorna held back her fingers and tightly shut her eyes. Instead, she pushed Tanza's chest, which had been embracing her, and sent her a step backwards. Tanza and Yorna, after having finally embraced, the two of them were separated once again, and Tanza blinked her eyes. As Tanza could not decipher the intention behind that action, Yorna opened her mouth. Yorna, for what reason have you come to a place such as this? Tanza, Yorna, at present, this imperial capital is the capital of the undead. This place that was abandoned not just by the soldiers of the empire, but even by the 9 divine generals and the emperor. What business does a girl like you have doing here? Getting up from her knees, Yorna glared at Tanza in a stern manner. Being stared down by those almond-shaped eyes, Tanza's slender shoulders slightly shrunk. For a moment, she did not know what she had been told. But she immediately understood that those were words of rejection. Yorna, the compassionate woman who accepted all things, had rejected Tanza. Yorna, this place is far too harsh and savage for the living to be. It would be wise to leave at once. If you cannot, shall I send you off by my own hand? Tanza, if you are distinguishing between the living and the dead, then for Yorna Summer too, that condition is, Yorna, the same. You believe that you and I are the same. Though she had been struck with shock, Tanza had tried to protest, and Yorna reached her hand towards her. However, that was not for the sake of stroking Tanza's cheek, but to seize her by the collar. 5 of Yorna's slender fingers grabbed the overlap of the kimono, and the legs of Tanza's small body were suspended. She had been held up before, but it had never been done to her in this kind of violent manner. Yorna, you and I do not stand on the same side. I have someone whose side I wish to remain by. At long last, I can be with that person again. That is why, Tanza, Yorna Summer. HK, Yorna, I no longer have any need for you or the other children. At a distance close enough that their breaths could reach each other, Yorna looked into Tanza's face. That which Yorna had spoken was the reason she had remained in the imperial capital, filled with undead as it was. The reality was not that she had been held captive, but that she had remained here of her own volition. Tanza, just as Yorna was looking at her, Tanza had also been looking into Yorna's blue eyes. Deep within those irises, while Yorna was passing the days in the demon city, while she was gently attending to Tanza and the inhabitants of the city, fragments of a longing that never disappeared could be seen. Yorna Miss Higya had always been searching for something. That was certainly something that was unfathomably large and distant to Tanza, and even Yorna was unable to reach it. It seemed to her like searching for something akin to a star, something that was known to be bright, shimmering, and to have a dazzling gleam, but could not be reached. Yorna had always been searching for that she was someone who sought such a thing was known to Tanza, and to everybody else. She prayed that Yorna's wish would come true, and if it would not, then she desired to offer something in its place. It was not just Tanza, everybody had thought that way, and now, she had finally found it. Yorna's wish had reached the stars. If that was the reason why she was grabbing Tanza's collar like this. Tanza, please be happier as you reject me, Yorna-sama. Indeed, Tanza gripped the other's wrists, and told that to the poor liar whom she treasured dearly. I have become a bad child. Gripping the slender white wrist, Tanza deplored her utterly changed self in such a way. It was not supposed to be this way. For Tanza's ideal self, that was, the idealized image of wanting to be like her dead older sister, Zoe. Zoe was a very strong-willed and kind-hearted woman. The reason Tanza's birthplace had been destroyed was because of the prevalence of a superstition that boiling the antlers of the deer people tribe would create a panacea, causing them to be attacked by bandits who aimed to sell the antlers at a high price. With both her mother and father killed, the still young Tanza was pulled by the hand of her sister, and they were able to barely escape with their lives. But the sufferings of the two sisters did not end there. The evil clutches of those hunting their antlers caught up to them many times, and even without that, it was customary in the Wallachian Empire to prey on the weak. Many a time, their lives were in danger, and the extent to which her sister went through harsh experiences in order to obtain one plateful of soup was something Tanza could only conceive of after a few years had passed. At the same time, she detested that she was entirely dependent on her sister, unable to do anything, so much so that she wanted to kill herself. Zoe, Tanza, you must not curse anyone. People who can easily curse others will also be easily cursed in a similar manner. While emaciated and clad in tattered clothes, Tanza's sister would tell this to her on nights when they shared a single plate of soup. Without anybody treating them kindly, everybody was cold towards Tanza and Zoe. Whenever she spoke ill of that world, Tanza's kind sister would, without fail, scold her by saying that, not out of frustration, but out of parental love, Tanza's sister would scold her. Despite being her older sister, and at an age where one would still depend on their parents, it was far too early for her to become a parent. The superstition regarding the antlers of deer people did not peter out, so the sisters never settled in one place. They were always fleeing, continuing to flee, and when they had become fatigued from all the fleeing, what caught the ears of the two sisters was a rumor of the demon city, Chaos Flame. It was told that in that place, many demi-human tribes lived together and that it was a paradise for the ostracized. The mistress who ruled there was said to be strong, filled with compassion, and a wonderful person who did not tolerate the weak being oppressed. Such a prospect was ridiculous, Tanza thought with her childish heart. There was no way such a person existed. It was impossible for such a convenient person to exist. Even if such a person did exist, then why had her mother and father died? Why was her sister, so emaciated and ragged as she was, leading Tanza by the hand like this? Therefore, you have done well, Zoe, Tanza. Finally, having reached the paradise that should not have existed, when the woman in the beautiful kimono brought the two ragged, dirty sisters up to the castle and embraced them as they clumsily introduced themselves, Tanza heard her sister raise her voice and cry for the first time. Even on the day their mother and father died, even on the days that a spectacle was made of her for a plate of soup, and even on the days when an unreasonable Tanza would curse at her with inconsiderate words, Zoe never cried. Seeing Zoe shed tears and sob as she clung to the woman's chest, Tanza also raised her voice and cried, and as she did so, she had a thought from the bottom of her heart. She thought that she would never lose the paradise created by this woman. No, that she would absolutely never lose this woman, Yorna Miss Higya. Her childish heart firmly believed so. They were provided with meals and a bedroom, and the kimono-clad Zoe was beautiful. She was Tanza's pride. There were many who adored Yorna and earnestly wished to serve her. Among them, Zoe was the most serious and hard-working, and Yorna came to appoint her to a responsible post. Tanza was proud that Zoe was serving the amazing Yorna and doing important work. She had thought that she would be like her sister one day, wholeheartedly serving Yorna, and wanting the existence of the paradise known as Chaos Flame to be known to many more of the weak who suffered. Her sister had died 2 years after that life had begun. Outside of the demon city, there was a group of demi-human tribes that sought the protection of Chaos Flame. When they were passing by a fortress of Imperial soldiers conducting a military campaign, her sister was in contact with the group as Yorna's representative, and was in the middle of guiding them to the demon city. The Imperial soldiers attacked the group of demi-humans under the guise that they were potential enemies, and her sister was abruptly killed. Tortured to death for a reason unrelated to the antlers of deer people, her corpse was subjected to disgrace. Zoe, Tanza, you must not curse anyone. People who can easily curse others will also be easily cursed in a similar manner. The words of her older sister flashed through her mind, and in the midst of sorrow, Tanza's heart was ripped to shreds. Even after this, was it something she must not do? Even after this, was she not to curse anyone? After her older sister, who was finally supposed to be happy, was killed, was she still not to curse anyone? Yorna, do you happen to hate this country? Tormented by despair, as Tanza suffered as if her own antlers had been broken, a voice called out to her. She had put on a kimono to imitate her sister, but with her scant knowledge of being an attendant, it was impossible for her to imitate her sister, and her weak, brittle heart could not hide what she truly felt. As Tanza lamented that those feelings of hers had been found out, the woman's hand stroked her cheek. Yorna, I do, too. While stroking it, the woman affirmed Tanza's rage, affirmed her cursing, and, in place of Tanza, who did not have the power or means to give that curse form, she took action. Even if that meant she would need to face off against the mighty empire, she cared not. Yorna, I, too, despise the ways of this country. Whenever the flamboyant, Yorna Mishigya, rose in rebellion against the empire, it was always for the sake of another. Since Tanza knew she was a woman who would do so, she did not want to be the cause. She wanted to remain a child who did not cause Yorna to face danger. She wanted to remain a child who did not cause Yorna to face sorrow. Like her sister Zoe, she wanted to be a good attendant, one who did not trouble Yorna. And yet, Tanza had become a bad child. Tanza, Yorna-sama saved my older sister. Tightly squeezing the wrist, grabbing her by the collar, Tanza's lips spoke. Perhaps because Tanza's reaction, conduct, and words had all been unexpected, Yorna's blue eyes widened, and her lips faintly quivered. The fact that those trembling lips mouthed the name of her older sister, Zoe, would not go overlooked by Tanza. Tanza, Yorna-sama acceded to my selfish request. After the rebellion that clashed directly against the imperial capital when Zoe lost her life, Yorna had gotten revenge for Tanza's older sister, and Tanza had requested to serve in her sister's place. It was a request akin to the height of impudence, and she was extremely insufficient for the role, but Yorna accepted it with pleasure, and Tanza had served her wholeheartedly. She had been permitted to do so. Tanza, Yorna-sama has brought about happiness for a great deal of people. Outside of herself and her sister, just how many people had Yorna supported? Just how many people had been saved and protected by their connection to Yorna? Tanza's words and actions were nothing more than a small fragment of that cluster of gratitude. If Yorna was leaving all of that behind and proceeding without reserve, that would be fine. If Yorna thought of them as a heavy burden, and wanted to become light in order to fly up and reach the stars, that would be fine too. If Yorna was unhappy, they would not want her to stay with them. If they were to say they wanted Yorna to stay with them even if she was unhappy, that would be as selfish as a curse. That was why, if she was going to shake free from the hands holding onto her, Tanza wanted her to at least smile, wishing for happiness. If she could not do so, Tanza, Yorna-sama, you still love us. Without letting go of those emotions, which were not in the past tense, but were still present even now, Tanza clearly declared so. In front of her, Yorna's eyes were widened past their limit, and she fell into a state of astonishment. Her face was as if it were completely inconceivable that Tanza would ever talk back to her. In reality, that must have been so. Tanza had wanted to serve Yorna well. Like Zoe, she had quietly obeyed Yorna's words, and put in the utmost effort to make them come true. But, a glimpse of her ineptitude for that should have become apparent when she was separated from Yorna, the emperor and the fake emperor who visited Chaos Flame. In order to prevent them from dragging Yorna into their war, Tanza had acted independently from Yorna, and ended up unnecessarily amplifying the disorder. As a result, Tanza was separated from Yorna during the events that followed, and she experienced many things. And now, having finally reunited, Tanza was directly objecting to Yorna. She was a bad child. She had become a bad child, the person she wanted to be happy. She did not want that person to compromise in the act of becoming happy. For that purpose, Tanza would even overcome that person's words and prayers. What a bad child she had become. Yorna, eyes wide open in astonishment, a feeble breath spilled from Yorna's lips. That was Yorna's reaction to the pain from her wrist being firmly gripped. As Tanza's collar was being held up by Yorna's wrist, she firmly gripped the wrist in return. Supposing it was as Yorna had said, that she did not care about Tanza or the others, and that she was freely doing what she desired, then this ought to have never happened. Yorna's soul marriage technique distributed power to those she loved. The effects would also apply to Yorna herself, due to the logic of self-love, the feelings of affirmation towards oneself, which could even be called a manifestation of the belief that one's actions were right. As long as she sincerely believed that she was correct, extraordinary power would surge within Yorna Mishigya. But, if she did not believe that was the case, what would happen then? Though she was one of the 9 divine generals, an apex of the Wallachian Empire's military, if Yorna could not affirm her own deeds, she would rapidly lose strength. And unmistakably, that very phenomenon had occurred, to the extent that the sword of the undead swordmaster, who had parted ways with life, had surpassed her in strength. Yorna could not support those whom she could not love, those whom she could not affirm. That was why she could not support her current self. That was why, Tanza, Yorna Summer, those feelings of love are the only thing you cannot feign. A blue flame alight in her left eye, Tanza believed in Yorna's love without a single shred of doubt. Yorna, as the suspended legs returned to the ground, and Tanza looked at her while her eye flamed, Yorna was at a loss for words. Pressing down on the wrist that had been gripped so tightly, Yorna looked at Tanza's face in front of her. There was no proof of love as great as the flame housed therein, and she stared at it as if it were unbelievable. It was as if she was under the impression that she could completely deceive her own heart. Tanza, Yorna Summer, you are not a very skilled person. To tie up your hair and get dressed up in your kimono, were you not always relying on the strength of me, my sister, or of everyone else who loves you? Saying that, Tanza stood up on her tiptoes and stretched out her back, and with her stretched out hand, she stroked Yorna's cheek, just as it had once been done to her, and just as she would one day do to somebody she wanted to lovingly cherish. At the sensation of those fingers, Yorna's blue eyes greatly wavered. They wavered, just like when her older sister raised her voice and cried for the first time. It was as if a stout heart was fissuring. Thereupon, Emilia, HK. You can't. Tanza-chan. Behind Tanza as she faced Yorna, the voice of a cornered Emilia, and the sound of Zori firmly stepping on the ground, seized her eardrums. At the same time, the sound of a blade was unsheathed. She could conceive that a single Rowan had slipped past Emilia's interference, and was trying to approach in this direction. Rowan, out of the way, Missy. This overhere's the stage I've yearned for in my dreams. Along with a selfish remark, the enemy ran like a strong wind. Yorna had likely seen him from over her shoulder. Right away, she reached her hand out to Tanza's shoulder, and tried to push her body out of the way to protect her. As if to return the favor from earlier, this time she would try and serve as Tanza's shield. Tanza, however, I cannot allow that. Yorna, Tanza, HK? Standing firm and enduring the hand that tried to push her out of the way, Tanza rejected that action. Instead, she turned around to protect Yorna behind her, and faced off against the hideous golden irises heading in her direction. The unleashed sword aimed to slash through Tanza's neck, and to cut Yorna in half behind her. The stroke of the blade was enough to scorch the chilled atmosphere, and as it approached Tanza's neck, Rowan, HK, Tanza, the stage of your dreams, was it? Stifling the shock in the back of his throat, Rowan widened his golden eyes. That must have been so. There was no doubt that he had not expected for the attack he had unleashed with all of his strength to be caught by such a small child. With her raised hand, Tanza caught and intercepted the flash of silver that scorched the atmosphere. Yorna's soul marriage technique distributed power to those she loved. If one believed that they were correct, and there was no doubt that they were loved, if they selfishly believed that from the bottom of their heart, its effects would be tremendous. Tanza's also mine, so it's like she's basically on our side, right? Ah, how irritating. She was confident that she was loved, she had been infected as a bad child. That was far too irritating and unbearable. She was truly glad that it was in her nature not to show it on her face. Tanza, apologies. I am quite busy, so I do not have the time to be watching happy dreams unfold. Putting strength into her hand and crushing the katana grasped within, with an astonished reaction to her front and rear, Tanza aimed at the face of the nuisance before her, and drove the fist that had shattered the katana right into it, giving a strike that went through his nose, and caved it into the inside of his head. Tanza made a declaration. Her days of merely dreaming of paradise, and continuing to pray for the sake of her precious person, were over. Without taking action herself, she would never be able to grasp paradise or her precious wishes. Having been saved by her older sister, having been aided by Yorna, having met Natsuki Schwartz and other comrades in the Pleiades battalion, and having finally arrived here, Tanza's answer was, Tanza, because there is a harsh, cruel, but lovely reality that awaits. After all, in order to reach the stars, she did not have time to stop in her tracks.